The courtroom was silent except for the quiet shuffle of papers and the soft tapping of shoes against the polished floor. Maria stood near the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had worked for Mr. Daniel, one of the richest men in the city, for more than 10 years. She had always been honest, careful, and loyal. But now she found herself in a situation she had never imagined, accused of wrongdoing she did not commit. Judge Wallace, a tall man with a sharp face and cold eyes, sat at his bench. His robe hung loosely over his shoulders, and he seemed to enjoy the power he had over everyone in the room. He glanced down at Maria with a faint, mocking smile. "So, you are the maid who claims to know the truth about Mr. Daniel?" he said, his voice full of doubt. Maria took a deep breath. She had been nervous before entering the courtroom, but now, seeing so many people watching her, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She knew she had to speak clearly and honestly. "Yes, Your Honor," she said politely. "I know exactly what happened that day, and I want to tell the truth." The judge leaned back in his chair, his smirk growing. "Very well. Let us hear this truth. But remember, your position does not give your words more value than anyone else's. You are a servant, not a witness of importance." His tone was sharp, almost cruel. Maria's heart pounded, but she did not waver. She remembered all the years she had spent working for Daniel, the times she had helped him in small ways that no one noticed, and the trust he had placed in her. She had seen the truth clearly, and now she had a chance to share it. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "I have worked for Mr. Daniel for a long time. I know him well, and I know he would never ask me to do anything wrong. I saw what happened that day, and I want to explain it clearly so everyone understands." A few people in the courtroom whispered to each other, impressed by her calm and respectful manner. Some had expected her to be nervous and uncertain, but Maria spoke with quiet confidence. She described the morning in detail, the way Mr. Daniel had walked into his office, the visitors who had come, and the small events that others might have ignored. Her words were simple, but they painted a clear picture. Judge Wallace's eyes narrowed. He interrupted. "Do you really expect us to believe your version? You are just a maid. How could you understand what a wealthy businessman is doing?" Maria did not flinch. She held her head high and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, it is true that I am a maid, but I have been with Mr. Daniel for many years. I have seen him every day, and I know when he is honest and when he is troubled. That day I saw everything clearly, and I am only speaking the truth. My job may be simple, but my eyes and my memory are careful. I want to make sure no one is blamed for something they did not do." For a moment, the judge said nothing. The courtroom seemed to lean forward, waiting for his response. Maria's words had struck a chord with some people. They saw her honesty and courage, even in the face of ridicule. "Very well," Judge Wallace said slowly, his voice quieter now. "Let us hear your story. Speak carefully. Make sure you do not exaggerate or hide anything." Maria nodded. She knew this was her chance. She took a deep breath and began to explain every detail she had remembered, every small action, every word spoken that morning. She spoke with clarity and patience, making sure that everyone could understand. As she spoke, the courtroom slowly began to change. People who had once doubted her began to listen more carefully. Even Judge Wallace, who had mocked her at first, leaned slightly forward as if trying to catch every word. Maria did not know it yet, but her courage and honesty were about to make a difference in a way she could never have imagined. Maria continued speaking, her voice steady and calm. She knew every word mattered. The courtroom was filled with people who had come expecting drama or scandal, but instead they were hearing clarity and truth. Maria described how she had been with Mr. Daniel that morning, noting small details that others might have overlooked. She explained how he had acted kindly toward everyone, how he had conducted his work honestly, and how she had been present to see certain events that were now misunderstood. Judge Wallace frowned, tapping his fingers on the edge of the bench. He seemed determined to challenge her, but Maria did not flinch. She had expected questions, interruptions, and even ridicule. She had prepared herself for every possibility. "Your Honor," she said, "I only want to tell exactly what I saw. I do not want to make anyone look bad. I only want the truth to be understood." Some murmurs ran through the courtroom. People began to notice how sincere she sounded. Her words were simple, but there was a quiet strength behind them. She spoke of how she had followed instructions carefully that day, how she had observed interactions between Mr. Daniel and his guests, and how she had noticed small actions that showed the real story. Judge Wallace leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Do you expect us to believe that you saw all of this? You are only a maid. How could you possibly know what was important and what was not?" he asked, his tone sharp and dismissive. Maria's expression did not change. She looked directly at the judge and replied, "Your Honor, I may be a maid, but I have worked with Mr. Daniel for many years. I have watched carefully. I have listened carefully. I have learned to notice even the smallest things. That is why I can tell the truth clearly. I have no reason to lie." A few people in the audience exchanged glances. Her confidence and calmness were making them think differently. She was not just speaking. She was proving that honesty did not depend on status or wealth. A person's position in life did not make their words less true. Judge Wallace cleared his throat, clearly irritated. "Very well, but you must understand that words are not enough. Evidence matters. Witnesses matter. How can we be sure your memory is correct?" Maria nodded. "I understand, Your Honor. I will explain everything I remember carefully. I will answer every question and I will not hide anything. I want the truth to be clear to everyone." Then she began to describe the timing of events. She told how Mr. Daniel had entered the office, greeted his staff, and received visitors. She described small but important details. How a particular visitor had dropped a paper, how she had picked it up and kept it safe, and how she had seen Mr. Daniel correct a misunderstanding calmly and fairly. Each detail was simple, but together they painted a picture that no one else had noticed before. The judge listened silently, but Maria could see that he was starting to pay attention. The mocking expression he had worn at the start was slowly fading. He still had questions, but she could sense that he could no longer dismiss her so easily. Some people in the audience began to whisper softly. They were impressed by her courage. A young clerk sitting near the front leaned forward, taking notes. A few journalists, who had expected a sensational story, began to realize that the real story was the honesty and intelligence of someone who had often been overlooked. Maria continued calmly, describing how she had observed Mr. Daniel treat everyone with fairness and respect. She explained how her careful attention allowed her to know what had actually happened and why the accusations against her were not true. Her words were measured, precise, and convincing. By the end of her explanation, a quiet respect had grown in the courtroom. People were no longer seeing just a maid. They were seeing someone brave enough to stand up for truth, someone willing to speak clearly even when others doubted her. Even Judge Wallace, known for his sharp judgment and harsh words, seemed forced to pause and think carefully about what she had said. Maria took a deep breath, knowing this was only the beginning. She had spoken the truth, and for the first time she could see a glimmer of change in the way people were looking at her. She had planted a seed of understanding, and now it was starting to grow. Judge Wallace's eyes narrowed as he listened to Maria's calm and clear explanation. He had expected her to stumble, to sound nervous, or to say something that could be dismissed easily. But instead, she had spoken with precision and confidence. For a moment, the judge seemed uncertain. His usual sharpness was replaced by a thoughtful silence. "Very well," he said finally, his voice controlled but slightly quieter than before. "You claim to know everything that happened that day. But how can we be sure your account is accurate? People often see things differently. Perhaps your memory is mistaken." Maria nodded politely. "Your Honor, I understand that memory can be tricky. That is why I am telling only what I saw clearly. I remember details that others might not notice. I am not guessing. I am only speaking the truth as I saw it." The judge tapped his fingers on the bench, clearly trying to regain his usual authority. "You are very confident, but confidence alone does not prove truth. How can we trust that your observations are correct?" Maria took a deep breath and met his gaze steadily. "Your Honor, I have worked for Mr. Daniel for many years. I have watched him carefully, and I have learned to notice small details. That morning I observed events step by step. I know what happened, and I can explain it clearly. I do not want to make anyone look bad. I only want the truth to be known." A few people in the audience whispered quietly to each other. Maria's calm voice and honest manner were making a strong impression. She was not trying to fight or argue with the judge. She was only presenting the truth. Judge Wallace leaned forward slightly, his expression still serious. "And yet you are only a maid. You are not trained to understand business or legal matters. How can you know what is important and what is not?" Maria held her posture, standing tall despite the judge's sharp words. I may not be trained in business or law, Your Honor, but I know what I saw. I know when Mr. Daniel acted fairly, and I know when events were misunderstood. My observations are clear, and I can explain them carefully. I am not trying to argue with anyone. I am only sharing what happened. The judge opened his mouth to respond but paused. Maria continued without hesitation, describing the small actions and reactions she had witnessed that morning. She explained how a visitor had accidentally spilled coffee, how she had quickly cleaned it up, and how Mr. Daniel had calmly helped without blaming anyone. She told about the misplaced document that she had found and returned, making sure no one was blamed unfairly. Her words were simple, but they were precise. They made the events easy to understand. The audience began to see that Maria had noticed details that others had ignored. Her careful attention and honesty were beginning to change their perception of the situation. Judge Wallace leaned back slightly, frowning. He had expected her to falter, but instead she continued with quiet confidence. He began to realize that he could not dismiss her so easily. Her memory was clear, her account consistent, and her demeanor calm. He had not anticipated such composure. A few lawyers in the courtroom exchanged looks. Even they were impressed. Maria was not just defending herself. She was presenting the truth in a way that everyone could understand. Her courage and calmness were turning the tide of the courtroom slowly but surely. "Continue," Judge Wallace said finally, his voice less mocking and more serious. "Explain everything you remember about that morning. Speak carefully." Maria nodded. She took another deep breath and began to describe more details. The order of events, the conversations she had overheard, and the small gestures that revealed the truth. Each word was measured, each fact clear. She did not exaggerate or add unnecessary details. She only spoke what she had seen. By the end of her explanation, the courtroom felt a shift. People were listening more intently. Judge Wallace, known for his harsh words and sharp judgment, was no longer smirking. He was silent, forced to consider the possibility that Maria was telling the truth. Maria stepped back slightly, letting the courtroom absorb her words. She had done her best to speak honestly and clearly. For the first time, she sensed that her courage and honesty were beginning to make a real difference. She had stood her ground, and now even the most skeptical eyes were watching her carefully. The courtroom remained tense after Maria's detailed explanation. Everyone could sense the change in atmosphere. Judge Wallace sat silently, his fingers tapping lightly on the bench. He was used to controlling the room with words, but Maria's calm confidence had made him pause. No one had spoken with such clarity and honesty in front of him for a long time. Just as the judge was about to speak, a voice came from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I would like to add what I saw," said Mr. Ahmed, a neighbor who often visited Mr. Daniel's office. He stepped forward, holding a small notebook. Maria recognized him immediately. She had spoken with him once or twice when she had delivered messages for Mr. Daniel. Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow, surprised by the interruption. "And who are you?" he asked sharply. "I am Ahmed, Your Honor," the man replied respectfully. "I live nearby and I happened to see what happened that day. I want to share the truth so there is no misunderstanding." The judge motioned for him to speak. "Very well. Go ahead." Ahmed opened his notebook and began explaining what he had observed. He described the timing of events, the people who had visited, and how Mr. Daniel had behaved kindly and fairly. He confirmed Maria's account, adding small details she had not mentioned, like how a delivery had arrived, how she had handled it carefully, and how she had ensured that no mistakes were made. Maria felt a small wave of relief. Having someone support her story was important, but she remained composed. She knew that her calmness and honesty were just as crucial as the witness's words. The audience began to murmur quietly. They were surprised that a neighbor had seen enough to confirm Maria's account. His testimony added weight to her words. People started to realize that she had been truthful all along. Judge Wallace's expression changed slightly. He frowned, leaning forward. He could not easily dismiss the neighbor's testimony, and combined with Maria's clear account, the situation was beginning to shift in her favor. "Your Honor," Ahmed continued, "I saw the events clearly from my window. Maria was careful, responsible, and honest in everything she did. She was not involved in any wrongdoing. I can confirm that what she said is true." A few people in the courtroom whispered to each other. Even some of the lawyers looked impressed. It was rare for someone in Maria's position to have such support, and it made her story even more credible. Judge Wallace remained silent for a few seconds, considering the testimony. He had expected Maria to be alone, struggling to defend herself against accusations. But now, with an independent witness confirming her account, the judge found it difficult to challenge her credibility. Maria stayed composed, letting Ahmed finish without interrupting. She understood that this was not about winning with anger or arguments. It was about being honest, patient, and consistent. Her calmness had begun to speak louder than anyone's harsh words. After Ahmed finished, the judge finally spoke. "I see. Your account is supported by an independent witness. This changes the situation. It seems that perhaps we have underestimated your position and the clarity of your observations." Maria nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor. I only want the truth to be understood." The audience shifted in their seats, noticing the subtle change in the judge's demeanor. He no longer looked mocking or dismissive. Instead, there was a quiet seriousness in his expression. He was beginning to realize that Maria's honesty and careful attention had given her the strength to face scrutiny and remain truthful. A few minutes later, the judge asked Maria to clarify some small points from Ahmed's testimony. She answered each question carefully with patience and precision. Her voice remained steady and she did not hesitate. Every answer strengthened her credibility. By the time Maria stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom had a new energy. People were no longer seeing her as just a maid. They were seeing her as someone brave, careful, and truthful. Even Judge Wallace, known for his sharp words and confident judgment, had started to view her differently. Maria took a deep breath. She had done her part, and now the truth had begun to shine. The support from an unexpected witness had made her story stronger, and the courtroom had begun to recognize her courage and honesty. She knew that the next steps would be just as important, but for now she felt a quiet sense of hope. Maria returned to the witness stand, feeling more confident than before. The support from Mr. Ahmed had strengthened her resolve. She knew the courtroom was beginning to pay attention to her words, and she was determined to speak clearly about every small detail that mattered. Even Judge Wallace, who had been mocking at first, now listened with a thoughtful expression. "Your Honor," Maria began politely, "I want to explain some details that may seem small, but they are important to understand what really happened." The judge raised his eyes, curious. "Go ahead," he said, his tone more serious than before. Maria spoke slowly, describing the sequence of events with precision. She mentioned how the morning had started, how the visitors had arrived in a particular order, and how she had observed their interactions with Mr. Daniel. She spoke of a small envelope that had been misplaced on the desk, and how she had noticed it immediately. She explained that she had picked it up carefully, ensuring it was returned to its proper place so no confusion would occur. The audience listened quietly. Every person in the room could see that Maria was not exaggerating or adding unnecessary details. She was focused on facts, and her careful observations made her story easy to follow. Judge Wallace's fingers drummed lightly on the bench, a subtle sign that he was paying close attention. He had begun to realize that Maria's knowledge of events was detailed and accurate. The small details she mentioned were not the kind of things someone would remember if they were making up a story. Maria continued, explaining how a particular visitor had raised a question, and how Mr. Daniel had responded patiently. She described how she had noted the exact time the conversation had ended, and how she had observed that Mr. Daniel handled the situation fairly, without blame or anger. Her voice remained calm and steady, showing no sign of fear despite the courtroom's scrutiny. A few people in the audience whispered quietly to each other. They were impressed by her ability to notice small, important details. It was clear that Maria had been paying close attention, and that her account was trustworthy. Judge Wallace finally spoke. "You seem to remember everything clearly, but why do you think these small details are so important?" Maria looked at him politely. "Your Honor, sometimes small details can change how people understand a situation. They can show who is responsible for an action and who is not. If these details are missed, the truth can be misunderstood. That is why I am sharing them carefully. I only want the real story to be clear." The judge leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. He had underestimated Maria at first. He had thought she would be nervous and uncertain, but now he saw her confidence and honesty. She was not only defending herself, but also helping the court see the truth clearly. Maria noticed that a few lawyers were nodding quietly. Even some journalists were paying closer attention, realizing that the story was about more than an accusation. It was about courage, honesty, and careful observation. She went on to describe how she had noticed a small calendar on Mr. Daniels' desk, showing that a meeting had been scheduled earlier than some people thought. She explained how she had seen him organize documents with care, making sure everything was correct before any visitors arrived. Every detail she mentioned confirmed that she had been observant and truthful. Judge Wallace's eyes shifted. He had no choice but to consider her account seriously. The combination of her clear memory, precise details, and calm manner made it difficult for anyone to dismiss her. He had learned an important lesson. Even someone in a position society might overlook could hold powerful knowledge and insight. As Maria finished, she took a quiet breath, letting the courtroom absorb her words. The room felt different now. People were no longer skeptical or dismissive. They were listening, learning, and beginning to respect her honesty. Even Judge Wallace, who had mocked her at the start, seemed thoughtful and silent, as if her words had opened his eyes. Maria stepped back slightly, keeping her composure. She had shown that truth and attention to detail could overcome doubt. She had not shouted or argued. She had simply presented what she saw with clarity and honesty. The courtroom had begun to see her differently, and she felt a quiet pride knowing she had made a difference with her courage and careful words. The courtroom held its breath as the doors opened. A hush fell over the audience. Maria looked up and saw Mr. Daniel walking in. He was calm, composed, and carried himself with quiet authority. The judge's eyes followed him as he approached the front of the room. Everyone knew that his presence could change the course of the case. "Your Honor," Daniel said politely, addressing Judge Wallace, "I wish to speak about Maria and the events in question. I believe her account is accurate, and I want to share what I know." Judge Wallace motioned for him to proceed. "Very well. You may speak," he said, his tone showing both authority and curiosity. Daniel turned his attention to the courtroom. He spoke clearly and carefully, describing the day's events from his perspective. He recounted how Maria had assisted him that morning, noting her careful attention and honesty. He explained how she had ensured everything was in order, and how her observations were accurate. Maria listened quietly, her heart swelling with pride. She had always trusted Mr. Daniel, and now he was showing the courtroom that trust was well placed. She had stood up for the truth, and now someone with influence and credibility was supporting her account. Daniel continued, "Maria has worked with me for many years. She is reliable, careful, and honest. On that day, she observed everything accurately. She has no reason to lie, and I can confirm that her account matches exactly what happened. She acted responsibly and with integrity." The audience murmured softly. Daniel's words carried weight. He was a respected businessman, and his testimony made Maria's version of events stronger than ever. People began to see that her honesty had been recognized and valued by someone of importance, and that recognition added credibility to her story. Judge Wallace's expression shifted slightly. He had faced confident witnesses before, but rarely had he seen someone with such integrity confirmed by a respected figure like Daniel. He leaned forward, listening carefully, and no longer wore the mocking expression he had shown at the start of the trial. "Can you provide more details about Maria's actions that day?" the judge asked. His tone was now serious and attentive. Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Maria noticed small errors that could have caused problems if left unchecked. She made sure documents were correctly organized and returned misplaced items. She also observed interactions between visitors and staff, and she accurately described the events that morning. Her careful attention helped prevent misunderstandings. She acted honestly and without personal interest." Maria felt a quiet sense of relief. She had not needed anyone to speak for her, but Daniel's support added a strong, undeniable layer to the truth she had presented. His words were clear, precise, and filled with respect for her honesty. A few people in the courtroom whispered to each other, impressed by the loyalty and trust between Maria and Daniel. Even the lawyers were paying closer attention, realizing that the combination of Maria's careful observation and Daniel's confirmation left little room for doubt. Judge Wallace tapped his fingers lightly on the bench, a subtle sign that he was considering the weight of Daniel's testimony. "It seems," he said slowly, "that Maria's account is supported by both her careful observations and the confirmation of someone with authority and first-hand knowledge. This is unusual, but it is important." Maria remained calm, letting the words settle in the room. She had done her part by speaking honestly and clearly. Now Daniel's support had made the truth impossible to ignore. The courtroom's energy had shifted. People were no longer skeptical. They were beginning to respect her courage, honesty, and diligence. Daniel finished speaking and gave a respectful nod toward Maria. She returned it with a quiet smile, feeling proud but composed. The judge leaned back slightly, thoughtful, as he considered all that had been said. For the first time, Maria felt that the court truly saw her, not just as a maid but as a person of integrity and honesty. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The judge's smirk was gone, replaced by serious attention. The audience was silent, reflecting on the words of both Maria and Daniel. Maria had spoken truthfully, and now that truth had been confirmed by someone respected and credible. The stage was set for the next steps in the trial, and Maria's courage had brought her closer to justice. The courtroom was quiet. All eyes were on Judge Wallace. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what to say. Maria had spoken honestly and clearly. Ahmed, the neighbor, had confirmed her account. Now Daniel, the billionaire she had faithfully served, had backed her words with his calm and precise testimony. Even the people in the audience who had once doubted her now watched with respect and attention. Judge Wallace's fingers tapped lightly on the bench, but he no longer wore the smirk that had once marked his arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Maria noticed the change immediately. The judge, known for his sharp words and quick dismissals, was speechless. Finally, the judge cleared his throat. "I have listened carefully to all that has been said," he began slowly, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "I have heard your account, Maria, and I have heard supporting testimony from others. It is clear that you have spoken honestly and with care. You have noticed details that others might have missed, and your memory appears precise and trustworthy." Maria nodded politely, her hands resting calmly in front of her. She felt a quiet sense of pride, but she did not celebrate. She knew that the courtroom was watching, and her dignity was as important as the truth she had presented. The judge's eyes shifted toward Daniel. "And your confirmation of her account adds weight to the statements she has made," he said thoughtfully. "It is rare to see such consistency and clarity, especially from someone who is not expected to be a key witness. Your words help establish the credibility of her observations." Daniel nodded calmly. "Your Honor, Maria has always been honest and careful. She acted responsibly and with integrity that day. Her actions prevented mistakes and ensured fairness. I have no doubt about her truthfulness." Judge Wallace leaned back in his chair again, taking a moment to absorb everything. He looked down at his notes, then back at Maria. "I must admit," he said, his tone softer than before, "that I underestimated your clarity and honesty. You have presented your observations with patience and accuracy. You have stood your ground without arrogance, without argument, and without fear. That is commendable." Maria felt a small smile form on her lips. She had remained calm and respectful throughout the trial, and now the judge, once mocking, was showing respect. She had proven that truth and courage could overcome doubt and skepticism. The courtroom shifted with a new energy. The audience, previously tense and curious, now seemed impressed. Some people whispered quietly to each other, amazed at how a maid, often overlooked in society, had displayed such intelligence, courage, and honesty. They could see that Maria's integrity had changed the way people viewed her, and even the judge could not ignore it. Judge Wallace looked down again, silent for several moments. Then he straightened slightly, his expression serious. "It is clear that the accusations against Maria are unfounded. She has shown honesty, loyalty, and careful attention to detail. She has spoken truthfully, and her account is supported by credible witnesses. I see now that my initial doubt was misplaced." A sense of relief washed over Maria, but she kept her posture composed. She had fought for the truth without raising her voice or showing frustration, and now justice was beginning to shine in her favor. Judge Wallace paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Maria," he said quietly, "your courage and clarity today have taught an important lesson. It is clear that honesty and careful observation have power, regardless of a person's social position. I acknowledge your integrity and the correctness of your account." The courtroom remained silent for a moment. Even the audience, moved by the judge's words, waited respectfully. Maria had not only defended herself but had also shown that dignity, loyalty, and truth could stand firm against doubt and prejudice. Maria lowered her eyes slightly, bowing her head in respect. She had remained calm, honest, and patient. Now the judge, who had mocked her at the start, had fallen silent in recognition of her courage and integrity. She had proven that truth and careful observation could overcome prejudice, doubt, and even authority. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. People were no longer skeptical or dismissive. They had witnessed something remarkable. A person of quiet strength, honesty, and courage standing firm, and even the most powerful figure in the room had been forced to acknowledge it. The courtroom was still as Judge Wallace looked around, his eyes lingering on Maria. The tension that had filled the room at the start of the trial had dissolved, replaced by a quiet respect. Maria stood tall, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She had spoken honestly, answered questions carefully, and remained composed through every challenge. Now all that effort had brought her closer to justice. "Maria," Judge Wallace began, his voice steady but full of sincerity, "after hearing your words, reviewing the supporting testimony, and listening to Mr. Daniel, I find that the accusations against you are without foundation. You have shown honesty, loyalty, and careful observation that are beyond reproach." A quiet murmur of approval ran through the audience. Maria felt a wave of relief, but she maintained her composure. She knew that showing grace was as important as speaking the truth. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I officially clear you of all allegations. Your account is accurate and your integrity is unquestionable. You have earned the respect of this courtroom through your courage and honesty." Maria's lips curved into a small, proud smile. She had stood up for the truth even when faced with ridicule. She had defended someone else's reputation while also protecting her own, and now the court had recognized her efforts. Mr. Daniel stepped forward and placed a supportive hand lightly on her shoulder. "Maria, I always knew you were honest and responsible," he said quietly. "You have shown everyone today what true loyalty and integrity mean." The audience responded with soft applause, acknowledging the dignity and strength Maria had displayed. People who had doubted her at the beginning of the trial now looked at her with admiration. Even Judge Wallace gave a small nod, showing that he too recognized the courage it had taken for her to speak the truth so clearly. Maria took a deep breath and looked around the courtroom. She had expected fear, doubt, and judgment, but she had faced all of it calmly. She realized that honesty, patience, and attention to detail could change perceptions, even in a room full of skeptics. Her words had created understanding and her actions had earned respect. Judge Wallace addressed the courtroom once more. "Let this be a reminder that integrity is not determined by status or position. It is determined by one's actions, honesty, and willingness to speak the truth. Maria has demonstrated these qualities fully, and her courage today will be remembered." Maria bowed her head slightly, acknowledging the judge's words with humility. She felt proud but not arrogant. She had done what was right, and that alone was enough. As the courtroom began to empty, many people approached Maria quietly, offering words of admiration and support. They praised her calm courage and her dedication to truth. She smiled politely at each person, grateful for their recognition but remaining modest. Outside the courtroom, the sun was shining brightly. Maria stepped into the light, feeling a sense of freedom and accomplishment. She had faced doubt, mockery, and challenge, yet she had remained truthful and composed. She had defended someone else's reputation while also proving her own integrity. Daniel walked beside her, speaking softly. "You have shown everyone what it means to act with honesty and courage, Maria. I am proud of you." Maria nodded, her heart full of quiet pride. She had learned that strength did not always come from loud words or confrontation. Sometimes it came from patience, careful observation, and speaking the truth with calm confidence. Judge Wallace's silence at the crucial moment had been a turning point. It had shown that even authority must recognize honesty and courage when it is displayed clearly. Maria's actions had left a lasting impression on everyone in the room, reminding them that integrity and loyalty have power, regardless of social standing. As Maria walked away from the courthouse, she felt a new sense of dignity and respect. Her truth had been heard, her integrity recognized, and her courage celebrated. She had faced every challenge with honesty and patience, and in the end she had triumphed. The story ended not with drama or argument, but with quiet strength, respect, and empowerment. Maria had proven that truth, loyalty, and courage could overcome doubt, mockery, and prejudice, leaving a lasting lesson for everyone who had witnessed her remarkable journey.